Chapter 3: Preserve Humanity. End the nuclear arms race. More than anything else, the people of the world are concerned about the outbreak of a nuclear war. Most now agree it would be the end of all living and growing things on this planet. People of the United States are part of this world peace majority. That is how they voted in the last congressional elections. The Soviet Union has taken the lead in the struggle to end the world-threatening nuclear arms race. Their concrete acts and bold proposals have pushed the war hawks into a tight corner. The Reagan administration has been forced to retreat on some questions. As a result, the possibility of agreements on the elimination of short and medium-range nuclear missiles from Europe, as well as a 50% reduction in long-range strategic weapons and confining Star Wars to the research laboratory, are now at a critical juncture. These could be important steps towards total scrapping of all nuclear weapons. Caution. Have no illusions, however. These positive developments should not lead to wrong conclusions. We should caution against illusions that led to inaction or pacifism. It is true, the Soviet Union is a powerful force for peace. It has taken the initiative. It will continue to be in the forefront of the struggle to free the world from the nuclear nightmare. But it is a serious mistake to sit on the sidelines and watch. There should be no illusions. There is not now. Nor was there ever any basic change in the outlook and aim of U.S. imperialism. Since World War I, U.S. policy has been to dominate as much of the world as possible economically, militarily, ideologically, politically and financially. This is the perpetual dream of the American century. This was the underlying rationale for dropping the atom bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This was the reason for the construction of 500 overseas, mostly nuclear, missile bases around the world. Instead of reducing these numbers, the Reagan administration is building more. The all-out drive to build weapons of first-strike nuclear superiority is the nuclearization of the U.S. policy of world domination. Star Wars is not a change in policy from an offensive to a defensive one. The Star Wars program is a continuation and integral part of the policy of nuclear aggression. The aim is to develop new anti-missile systems and build weapons of first-strike nuclear superiority. The ATOM Treaty, signed and ratified, definitely bans testing space weapons and placing them into orbit. To this point, however, Reagan has rejected the Soviet proposal even to negotiate on what ATOM technology tests are allowed under this American-Soviet treaty. The Pentagon generals and Caspar Weinberger are on the so-called broad interpretation that would literally wipe out all restrictions now contained in the treaty. Any idea that the building of weapons of nuclear superiority and the Star Wars program are not in support of and a continuation of the U.S. policy of insisting imperialist aggression is at best misleading. In fact, because of such ideas, some in the peace movement have moved from placing the blame both on the United States and the Soviet Union to a pacifist position that asserts no one is to blame. This position in the arms race 21 is often expressed by omission, by failing to place any blame on the real culprits, the war hawks in the Reagan administration. Lulled into pacifism, this has lulled some peace forces into thinking that a passive pacifism that calls for general appeals to the non-existent humanist side of capitalism, its good common sense and its self-interest, will work. This is a futile, self-defeating position that seeks a new philosophy that will supposedly overcome the irreconcilable main-class contradiction, including the contradiction between the two opposing world social systems. Others dream about some new ways to end the traditional confrontationist element in world relations. But imperialism does not respond to abstract humanistic appeals. There is nothing wrong in searching for new ways, new arguments for world peace. But when the search for the new ignores the unchanging reality of the basic, inherent nature of world imperialism, illusions are created. When the new is presented without the element of struggle, it leads to inaction, to immobilization, to pacifism. In order to activate the peace forces and for them to be effective, it is necessary to expose the fact that the drive for nuclear superiority, including the Star Wars projects, is related to and is an integral part of the policies of U.S. imperialism. It is necessary to expose the fact that U.S. imperialism still strives for the realization of its dream of the American century, and what it cannot achieve diplomatically, politically, financially and economically, it has plans to achieve through nuclear superiority. This continues to be a hard fact of reality. U.S. imperialism continues to lay claim to parts of the 5 continents and 5 oceans as vital to the national interests of the United States. When the Reagan administration sends warships and warplanes to the Persian Gulf, it is called keeping the sea lanes open. But when the Soviet Union sends 2 ships into the same region, it is labeled Soviet aggression and attempts to claim it for a Soviet sphere of influence. New thought patterns are some new modes of thinking in the grassroots and even in some corporate circles. there is a growing concern about the future of human existence. The fact that there are 137 nuclear-free zones in the United States, the largest legally binding one is in Cook County, Illinois, with 5 million people, least 150 cities, including many of the largest ones, that have now passed nuclear test ban resolutions, testifies to the new thought patterns. An indication of the breadth of the peace sentiment is that there are 431 peace organizations in the state of Ohio alone. This is a very important development. It provides a broad mass base for the mobilization of the majority in the struggle for world peace. It is the basis for a new kind of unity, a unity in struggle. Hate to admit it, but once in a great while some light penetrates even those thick walls of the editorial offices of the New York Times. A recent lead editorial was such a case in point. The heading read, "Kicking the Cold War Habit. After 40 years of Cold War, the United States now as a basis for thinking anew about policy toward the Soviet Union. Changed circumstances call for addressing those worries more constructively, with less emphasis on arms and more on diplomacy and cooperation. End the arms race." 23 President Reagan can leave no greater legacy than to take account of the new realities in East-West relations and put forward new guidelines for managing the transition from Cold War to Cold Peace and peaceful competition. American resources are stretched, and beyond doubt, the Pentagon budget will be cut. The nation's educational system, the needs of the young and the old, cry out for funds. Economic deficits must be closed. There can be no American national security, in the profoundest meaning of that term, without meeting these needs as well as military ones. Further, the Times editorial says, yet there are important common and parallel interests between the US and Soviet Union, which also demand attention. Telling these truths will be less exciting than spinning dreams or spitting insults, but far more helpful to steady policy than it goes on. Keep arms control at the top of the negotiating agenda. Limiting arms is not a substitute. Recognize growing common interests. Look forward to basic changes in the relationship only over the long haul. It will take strong leadership to disenthrall both sides of the fear and mistrust that have grown up over the years. Who knows, maybe there is some truth for policy, but it is the lead element. Link regional conflicts with other issues. But the new mode of thinking has not yet reached the decision-making inner circles of monopoly capital, certainly not to the extent that they have given up their drive to dominate the world. The changing balance of world forces, and the American people's opposition to US imperialist and interventionist policies have forced the Reagan at 24 administration to maneuver and retreat in some specific areas. This is very important. The tactics of the people's struggles must be based on understanding this. Thus, it is important to see both the nature of the basic, unchanged policy of US imperialist aggression and the new possibilities to force US imperialism to retreat. It is also important to understand that even contemplating the idea of retreat is not easily accepted in the ranks of monopoly capital. The natural instinct of corporate heads is the drive for maximum profits and supporting preparations for war and acts of imperialist aggression. Unity of peace majority today. There is an ever closer relationship between socialism and world peace. Socialism has become the key force in the maintenance of world peace. The great majority of humanity is for world peace. As with everything else, the struggle for peace does not take place in a status quo world. The progressive forces, and especially the forces of socialism, do not accept the status quo world. The class struggle goes on. Nations and peoples continue to mobilize and fight for their rightful place in the sun. And when they conclude that they cannot achieve their just goals peacefully, they fight for their inalienable rights by other means. As the old saying goes, that's life. Thus, it is not abstract forces or concepts, or even appeals, that move mountains. What molds these forces into an irresistible force for progress is unity in organization, mobilization and action. This is another arena where the unity of the major struggality in struggle can determine the course of history. Constitutional and political crisis. The Iran-Contra hearings have uncovered a termite-infested corrosion and disintegration of the very foundations of the constitutional democratic structure of our country. The exposes have unmasked high treason in high places. They have revealed a conspiratorial web, spun and led by high government officials and all sanctioned by presidential findings. The presidential shield was a shield for criminal conspirators. The crisis of democracy and the Constitution have deep roots in the general decaying crisis of U.S. capitalism. The personalities involved are important, but in a more basic sense it is not the individuals that core, it is the system that corrupts and spawns degenerate, double-dealing political swindlers. The system provides unlimited opportunities for thievery and corruption. Even though the conspiracy has been exposed, we must not overlook the extent to which it succeeded. For that which gave rise to the present crisis will give up the system, rise to others. Part of the reason for its success is the fact that the National Security Council and the SI fit into a police-state structure. They were originally set up to operate beyond any democratic controls. They were set up so they can bypass, and in the process take over, the functions of the US, Congress and the Cabinet. They are covert mainly because these are the kind of indefensible illegal activities that have to be kept secret from Congress and above all from the American people. 26 From the beginning they have been instruments of the Cold War. They are the control centre and staff for the SI was set up as a clandestine, paramilitary, ideological, political unit of mercenary commandos, a secret army, the forces of counter-revolution worldwide, of the executive branch. It is a rogue outfit carrying out the policies of a rogue government, and behind it all are the rogue imperialist corporations. In a sense, the White House conspiracy was a military takeover. Most of the operatives either are or were officers in the Marines. Even George Shultz admitted they were conducting a guerrilla war against anyone who opposed them. The PSI operatives were able to establish a junta that put together a secret mini-government with private and government money that made foreign policy decisions. They were involved in the business of gun and drug running, bombings and assassinations, and overthrowing democratically elected governments. As Poindexter brazenly admitted, they lied to the President, to the Congress, to the American people, even to members of the Cabinet, because they did not want any outside interference. They were the insiders and the American people became the outsiders. Under Nixon, these same forces established a network of prison concentration camps and drew up a plan for mass detention without trial. The Reagan-Casey junta took this idea further. While Reagan and the secret junta were condemning martial law in Poland, they were putting the finishing touches on a contingency plan for martial law in the United States in case of a national emergency. This secret Casey-North-Poindexter plan called for suspension of the Constitution, turning control of the government over to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, appointment of military commanders to run state and local governments, and the declaration of constitutional and political crisis 27 martial law, in the event of widespread internal dissent or national opposition to a U.S. military invasion abroad. The plan is on the boards, but parts are already being implemented. For example, preventive detention, jail without bail, is now the law of the land. The takeover and destruction of the Air Controllers Union and the plans for government takeover of the Teamsters Union are very much in keeping with the contingency plans. This contingency plan for martial law, together with the uncovering of the Kirkpatrick Poindexter North Handbook for covert aggression all over the world, draws a rather frightening picture of the vision of a U.S. future the fascist fringe is working for. Reagan, Buchanan, McFarlane, Poindexter, North, Deaver and Nofziger are not loose cannons on the deck of the ship of state. They are cold-blooded henchmen of monopoly capital. They are important cogs in the hub of reaction. But much more significant is the police-state structure they were building in the basement of the White House and the Gestapo mentality, the fascist ideology, that sustains them. Expose the roots. The most crucial question in the Iran-Contra crisis is that it is monopoly capital that gives rise to and sustains this cancerous growth, the creeping growth of a police-state structure in the very heart of the democratic governmental edifice. They shape and finance the police-state structure to rule and to serve their aim of maximum corporate profits. This is where the main roots of Iran-Contra are. In 1973, after the Watergate expose, we said, if the roots of Watergate are not exposed and cut, there will be new Watergates. So we welcome all the exposes, the Senate and congressional hearings. We join with all forces that have been propelled into action as a result of the exposes. But we cannot limit ourselves to the surface manifestations. We are for the whole truth, without limitations, because the interests of the people can best be served only by a full exposure of the roots and the processes that led to Watergates and Iran-Contra. The Iran-Contra hearings were limited. There was a cover-up of the president and the real essence of the crimes. Above all else, they wanted to cover up the fact that it is monopoly state capitalism that gives rise to the Iran-Contra. The mass media and most politicians want to cover up the fact that there has been a creeping build-up of a police-state structure and a mentality to match. They want to cover up the fact that it is anti-communism that is the mask the conspirators use to hide their deception. They want to hide these facts because the exposure would bring out into the light their own use of big lie, anti-communism. They want to protect the two old parties and the two-party system of monopoly capitalism. They talk about saving the presidency, but it is nothing more than a cover-up for Reagan. But with all their weaknesses and the shallow, slanted reporting by the mass media, especially by television networks, the hearings have had a positive effect. They have brought to the surface a deep concern for democracy and measured expressions in defense of the Constitution. At first there was a knee-jerk response to Nord's pseudo-patriotic performances, but it soon dissipated. The view of the great majority now is flag-waving that the conspiracy was a serious threat to the demi-government. These are the deeper second thoughts of the people. These new concratic structure of our CERNs cross class and party lines. Constitutional and Political Crisis 29. The challenge is to find the forms for an all-people's unity in defense of the Constitution and the democratic structure. It is necessary to expose the links between state monopoly capitalism and these police-state developments. We must sharply focus on the fact that it is a class structure resulting from the class policies of monopoly capitalism. U.S. Path to fascism. What has become clearer are the outlines of a unique U.S. pattern, a unique U.S. structure and path for fascism. This unique pattern consists of a creeping process of constructing a police government within a governed state structure within a parliamentary structure. This process has been one of creeping transition of the functions of government from the elected bodies to the corporate-like, police-state structure under the shield of the executive branch. We have paid attention to the politicians, but we have not paid enough attention to the structure of the creeping police-state development. We have raised the danger of the ultra-right and its policies, but we have not warned enough about fascist-like structures and creeping fascist ideas, changes that have set the stage for a police-state takeover. Monopoly state capitalism is a conglomerate of crisis. The build-up of the police-state capitalism in structure is a feature of this crisis. It is an attempt to overcome this crisis by way of eliminating the democratic structure. The creeping transition to a corporate police-state structure is fed by the same laws that feed the development of monopoly state capitalism. The police-state structure grows to serve its needs, staffed directly by corporate interests. The executive branch of the government is now run, and has been for years, by corporate executives. On short, it is blind trust sabbatical leaves from their corporations. As it has assumed greater powers, more and more has become the basic nature of the executive. It is dominated by big corporate executives and by top military brass. Reagan has never stopped serving General Electric, all the members of the Reagan cabinet, all the heads of departments, all those in executive positions in the Pentagon, all the key personnel in the State Department are on leave from the big corporations. They still get paid by their corporate bosses, mainly under the table. They go on the government payroll, but they never stop working for the corporations they come from and where they will go back to. They are corporate fifth column insiders inside the government. In this setup, the executive branch has become the direct, active participant in state monopoly capitalism. It deals directly with the corporations and their executive branches. This makes the corporate and state relationships direct. This provides the close-knit setup for the operation of state monopoly capitalism. In order to carry on these new tasks that have been assumed by the state, the president and the executive branch maneuver for more and more authority. This setup needs increasingly more secrecy and more it becomes a power unto itself. The Iran-Contra Reagan administration has become just that kind of a power. The executive and its henchmen are zealots who do not think twice about abusing power, breaking laws, bypassing Congress and members of the cabinet and of course the people. The executive branch has taken on the power to make war. The illegal wars conducted by Contras all over the world, led and fed by the CIA, are a direct violation of the Constitution, and they violate the War Powers Act. The executive branch directs open and secret paramilitary operations. It supports, trains and constitutional and political crisis 31 funds counter-revolutionary forces around the world. Huge military budgets. Would be an error to attribute this development to Reagan alone, because there is no question that in this past period it was sectors encircled of monopoly capital that decided to support moves in the direction of police-state power. It was monopoly capital that decided to draw up contingency plans and to push for it directly controls a qualitative shift, a qualitative change in the forms of class rule. This is the crux of the whole development. The decision to shift onto the path of secret, police-state rule was made by some of the most powerful monopoly capital circles, by the military monopolies. What makes it even more serious is that this decision was supported by other sections of monopoly capital. Reagan's lame duck plans are to give this process a further qualitative shift, especially through his Supreme Court appointments. Rehnquist and Bork are nominations of the White House junta. For some time we have had a creeping process, a gradual growth of a police-state corporate structure within the old constitutional structure. It became a contingency structure that could support a dictatorial takeover at some later date. We must do more probing in the area of the relationship between monopoly state capital and the ultra must study in greater depth the growth of a government within a government. We must do more digging into the dialectics of the overall effects of the crisis of capitalism and its effects on the superstructure, on the forms of class rule. We must probe deeper the specific pattern and path of Iran-Contra-Gate. It is important to understand that the creeping process of building a governmental right network, police-state structure within the democratic structure, is dictated by the unique US reality. The process was camouflage because there is no specific mass move 32 meant or support for such a process. Monopoly capital gives its support to this process because it provides an immediate form, a channel to carry out its policies. It must be clearly understood that the inherent danger was not only in the rise of the structure, but also in the creeping transference of state power from the elected bodies to the White House junta. This was a process within a monopoly-controlled bourgeois government. It was possible because the whole government structure is in the iron grip of the monopoly corporations. More reactionary, militaristic and anti-democratic elements include the military monopolies. They are in a sense an extension of the Pentagon, and the Pentagon is an extension of these corporations. They are closely related to the secret junta in the White House. We must give more basic thought to the ideological and political reasoning that attempts to justify the White House conspiracy to brainwash the people. The reasoning is that anything goes, any action, any crime, no matter how heinous, is acceptable because it is done in the name of national security and is needed to fight communism. They arrogantly defend the idea that it is permissible to lie to Congress, to the public and the world when it is in the interest of what they determine to be national security. In essence, this is an identical cover-up with those used by the forces of reaction today in Chile, El Salvador and South Africa. The Wall Street explosion uncovering the robbery, manipulations and schemes of the Boskis, Deaver's constitutional and political crisis 33 Novsigers and Wetex and the other so-called insiders are all part of the same system, a system whose underbelly is no Bertol. All are insiders of Caput, the invisible government, the Wall Street telesum thieves, the underworld gangsters, the corporate thugs, the swindling landlords and bankers. What is new in this cesspool of corruption and decay is that it is hard to distinguish now between what and illegitimate, between what is legal and illegal, between the underworld and the corporate world. We have to explain that there is no way to separate the billion-dollar deals of the underworld from those of the so-called legitimate wheeler-dealers. They are all capitalist insiders. They all break laws. They are as legitimate all products of capitalism. The secret government and covert operations are all a cover-up for the corporations. All this could not have taken place without them, especially the military monopolies and the personnel that operate between the government and the corporations but remain in the shadow government. All the insiders intermingle and are interchangeable. The military men operate between the Pentagon and Wall Street. Closely related to the covert actions and government by invisible retired military, PSI and FI personnel is the overall militarization and the role of the military in the economic and political life of the country. This is the essence of the political crisis. All the corruption, the lawlessness, the stealing and cheating, the lying and demagogy are an integral part of state monopoly capitalism on the downslide. There is yet another most basic lesson in this current crisis, that the whiff of fascism and reaction can be exposed and defeated. The people's second thoughts are laying the basis for a serious setback for reaction. They have opened up tremendous possibilities in the struggle to defeat the forces of reaction. Unity 34. The only way fascism has always been the response of monopoly capital in a crisis. But it has never been inevitable, and it is definitely not inevitable in the United States. Millions of Americans are now reacting, fed by second thoughts and by the residue of the democratic tradition in the United States. They have become concerned about the anti-democratic nature of the illegal, covert actions, the lies and cover-up pursued by the Reagan administration. The exposes and hearings have become an important victory for the forces of democracy and a very serious setback for the ultra-right forces and fascist-minded fringe. Reagan has been on the decline. Now Reagan and the Reaganites are being isolated. There is no question now that following the hearings, the more basic second thoughts of the people are laying the foundation for a new mass movement based on mass sentiment for the defense of the Constitution and the democratic government structure. They will mold the alliances in the 1988 presidential elections. Of course, when we speak of democracy in the context of capitalist society, it is understood that we speak of bourgeois democracy with all the limitations that capitalist society superimpose on it, limitations related to the corporate drive for maximum profits. This is a limitation of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. But it is better than no democracy. Therefore, we defend it, while working to expand it. Working to defend our limited democracy is not a defense of capitalism. On the contrary, it is a challenge to capitalism. Two broadest concerns in the minds of the people today. There is a coming together of the two broadest concerns that involve the great peace and democratic majority. 1. The concern for the preservation of humanity, constitutional and political crisis 35 and nature because of the threat of nuclear war, and 2. The deep concern for the preservation of U.S. democracy, the democratic structure and democratic rights. The danger in both cases comes from the same source, the most reactionary, militaristic, chauvinistic and racist, and anti-labor section of monopoly capital, as represented by the Reagan administration. Broad forces reflecting overall democratic traditions and feelings include the working class, middle class, intellectuals, professionals and people in the mass media. This includes large numbers of Afro-Americans, Chicano-Mexican Americans, Puerto Ricans and other oppressed minorities. How to tap the potential of this moment with initiatives that will lead to mass actions by the broadest democratic forces is the task at hand. Our task is to tap this potential so as to give rise to forms of political independence that will lead toward a new popular mass political party. Iran-Contra Gate calls for a restatement, a repackaging of some of our tasks. There is a need for new initiatives, for the building of a people's movement to establish a new democratic structure. A people's democratic structure. There is a need for movements and struggles to strip the executive branch of much of its powers, to limit or repeal its war-making powers and for constitutional reforms. In a nuclear world, no one individual should have such powers. There is a need for people's movements in the struggle to cut the military budget to the bone, to put an end to the war economy and the war budget. It is possible to go on an ideological offensive against monopoly capitalism. It is a moment when millions can be made to see that monopoly capitalism is the root of all social evils, that it is associated with everything that is anti-democratic, corrupt, immoral, 36 vulgar, criminal. It is a moment when masses can be made to see capitalism as an inhuman, brutal, anti-social system. In this sense, we can now help make a qualitative change in mass patterns of thought. We can raise political and ideological mass understanding to new levels. Today we have a new and historic moment to go on the offensive against the use of bitlie anti-comic and make a lasting, qualitative change in mass ideology. We can go on this offensive by exposing the demagogy of national security at home and NISM, national interests overseas. All people's unity, the exposes of the operations of the secret junta are making significant changes in the mass thought patterns that are cutting across class, political and party lines. In monopoly and business circles in general, there is a deep concern about the people's loss of confidence in the presidency, in the two old parties, and especially a loss of confidence in capitalism itself. There has been a dramatic rise of democratic concern in the great majority of Americans. This raises some important tactical and even some strategic questions. The slogan "All People's Unity" gives the lead. The tactical questions are: how to link up, how to merge the economic struggles, the struggles against racism and for equality, the striving for political independence, for peace and solidarity into the broad all people's kind of unity based on saving the world and all living things, and the fight to preserve the democratic structure at home.